common sense recap of the day's biggest stories. It's John Catsimatidis and Rita Cosby. Katz and Cosby on 77 WABC.
Let's go right to Andy McCarthy, the former Assistant U.S. Attorney, Southern District of New York. Lots of big Trump cases, Andy. First off, tomorrow there's the hearing on the so-called January 6th case. What do you think is going to happen?
Well, you're talking now about
the Tanya Chutkan, the judge.
Chutkan.
Yep.
Yeah. I think at this point, Rita, what they're going to try to do, I mean, they have a new indictment, but as I understand it, former President Trump doesn't have to be present, so there won't be an arraignment on the indictment. And I think what the issue is at this point is setting up a schedule to do what the Supreme Court told her to do, which is to go through the charges in the indictment with an eye toward what evidence the government would put up to try to prove the charges, and first figure out which of the evidence implicates official acts of the presidency and which don't. And if you have official acts of the presidency, the second question that has to be asked is, can the presumption of immunity that the Supreme Court said presidential actions have, can that be overcome by other interest or other evidence? So a long story short, there's no way this case is going anywhere not only prior to the election, but prior to the inauguration of a new president, because no matter what Judge Chutkan does, President Trump will have a right to appeal because it'll still be an immunity issue, and that has to be resolved pre-trial.
What do you think, Andy, with the sentencing now? Because it's sort of like all eyes on this sentencing. Trump tried to bring that case up to the federal court, and I saw last night it got shot down. So for now it sits in Judge Marchand of New York's case. Those are the 34 felony counts. I mean, it's this month. What do you think is going to happen?
Well, it's September 18th, and it's really insidious, Rita, because Judge Marchand should postpone the sentence. There's a pending immunity issue. It's not Trump's fault that there is. Trump objected to the introduction of the evidence involving his presidential acts in the trial, and Bragg's office, with the indulgence of Judge Marchand, put the evidence in, even though they should have known, because the Supreme Court was considering this very issue, that it might be very problematic. So, of course, now the Supreme Court has said not only is the president immune from prosecution over particular executive acts, but prosecutors aren't allowed to use as evidence official acts in order to prove other charges, which is exactly what happened here. So everyone knows there has to be an immunity litigation here. And even if Marchand won't dismiss the case or vacate the guilty verdicts because he's ruled Bragg's way the whole case, Trump is allowed to appeal that. So the sentencing should not happen until that is completely litigated. And what I think Marchand is trying to do is he's delaying his immunity ruling until September 16th, and then he intends to plow right ahead with sentencing on September 18th, which would frustrate Trump's ability to find a court to block Marchand from imposing the sentence, because they'll only have one business day to do it in between.
So let me ask you in layman's terms, you're saying that sentencing, regardless, because it's such a tight time frame for appeals and all that other stuff, do you still think that he may be sentenced to jail on the 18th?
Yeah, well, I think even more now, because it doesn't make any sense to me. Any good non-conflicted judge would recognize that you have an immunity issue, and therefore the sentencing shouldn't happen until the immunity is fully litigated. And what I see when I look at Judge Marchand is a judge who seems to be trying to find a way around that so he can get to sentencing. And there's no law enforcement reason that Trump needs to be sentenced prior to the election. The only reason to force that issue is obviously the partisan political issue that they want the Democrats to be able to say that Trump is a convicted felon facing a stiff prison sentence in the run-up to the election.
Wow, that's amazing. Andy McCarthy, Judge Weinberg.
I agree with that 110%, Andy. It's only a political decision. It's not a law enforcement. It's not a judicial decision at all. And Merchan should be ashamed of himself. I want to switch gears. I want to ask you your opinion about the fact that a year after the fact of the October 7th attack against Israel and the slaughter of all those people and the torture of all those people, now the DOJ wakes up and they decide they're going to file criminal complaint against Hamas and its leadership. What's that about?
By the way, the people that they named, there's only like one who's alive. Yahya Sinwar. The other ones, Israel already took care of it.
Okay,
Thank
so
goodness.
Isn't that just yet another political gambit by the Department of Justice, Andy?
I think it's actually, I feel it's an effort to undersell my career, because if they had told me during my 20 years that I could indict dead guys, I could have run up the score big time, But Rita's right. It's 3 of the 6 that are named in the indictment are dead. And that's not an accident. At first when I saw that, I thought, well, maybe they had written the complaint and it was under seal with the court, and then the guys died and then they unsealed it, and that's how that happened. But that's not the guy. One guy, Marwan, was killed like 5 months ago by Israel. And Haniya, the former head of Hamas, the departed head of Hamas, he was killed 5 or 6 weeks ago, and the other guy Deif was killed like 2 weeks before that. So they did this on purpose. They actually put these dead guys in the complaint on purpose, and the other 3 are people who are unreachable because they're in Gaza or they're under the protection of Iran, either in Lebanon or Qatar. So this whole thing, I don't regard it as a charging instrument. I regard it as basically a press release. And the idea behind it is
it's a political gambit to show they're doing something.
To show that, basically to show Kamala Harris is really tough on Hamas and really tough on Iran. If you lived through the Obama years where we weren't allowed to say jihad and we weren't allowed to refer to the Muslim Brotherhood and all that stuff, to read this complaint is laugh out loud funny, because they're in there saying, Iran, they take all these jihadist organizations that are connected to the Muslim Brotherhood and they give them all kinds of funding. I'm like, who are these guys? I remember these guys but Kamala is going to be the scourge of jihadist terrorism, at least for the next 6 weeks.
Yeah, for sure. And it's a good talking point for her at the debate. That was the first thing I thought about. Andy, thank you very much. Thanks so much.
Thanks,
Keep us
Andy.
posted.
Thank you, Andy.